exciting. I'm Natasha. Like Jackson said, I am at Safe Routes Partnership. I've been with the partnership for about 5 years, so it means that I've done these report cards twice. So we do them biannually every other year. I am somebody who researched particular indicators within the report cards because it's a large report. Um, and my like particular areas were the active transportation planning, complete streets, and state funding, but I'm really deeply familiar with all of the indicators. And if you have a question, then I can also always follow back up. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of the report cards, like what's the point, and then talk a little bit about the indicators more specifically for Missouri. And I just like want to say, like, I mean, we all know that Missouri, you guys scored a little low, and like that's just true. And I think I popped on right as you were saying, like, that means that there's like so much opportunity, right? Like you can basically strike wherever you see sort of like a ripe opportunity or a strategy that you can like steal and copy from another state. Like there's 51 ways to do all of these things. So I just want to say that like I'm not here to be like, you're not doing the work because I think I have always been really impressed by the work that y'all are doing in a state where like it's not something that's sort of coming easy, and I think it does make for creativity. Anyway, so happy to be here. Just as a little intro, Safe Routes Partnership is out here trying to advance safe walking and rolling to and from schools and in everyday life, and improving the health and well-being of people of all races, incomes, and abilities, and building healthy, thriving communities for everyone. We're a national organization. We're also all over the country. I'm in Seattle, Washington, but I'm from Ohio originally, but we have staff all over the country. So, as just like a little intro, like what's the point of these? We're here to provide sort of a snapshot of how supportive states are for walking, biking, and physical activity through like funding and policy and various practices. We've been doing these reports since 2016, and we've updated them every other year since then. We've expanded based on new information and changes to federal law. And you'll see a little bit of that in this year as well because of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Um, and we kind of add and change things, but there's certain things that have stayed core, which is like this is all about like how can states be supportive of walking, biking, physical activity for children and adults. Ideally, the report card acknowledges the strengths of each state and lets advocates and state governments understand that there's sort of a roadmap for some of this stuff. And um, we want to just show the potential of how states can support this work and can also like show what your counterparts are doing, and you can learn from each other. So I just want to point out, so on our website, you can like click a map and get your specific report card. But there's also a full report with a lot of this information in it. So research on why physical activity and walking and biking matter. So like if you need to give a presentation, you can like go in, we have a bunch of research backed cited things that you can pull. Detailed explanations of every indicator and how we scored it, where'd the information come from, why does it matter? And then vignettes on really standout programs and practices from each category. So, like for example, Kansas is doing really incredible work on Safe Routes to School right now, and so we like wrote a little bit more of an in-depth program profile about it, so you can learn a little bit more about that. There's also reflections and comparisons from previous years, some various maps illustrating findings, and appendices with scores by state and additional breakdowns. So I just want to point out that there's a larger report to get a lot of this info. So on our website, if you go to Safe Routes Partnership, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see this Making Strides banner, and it'll take you to a map that's clickable, and you can click on Missouri. Just get your report card. And also feel free to do that while we're on the call, so you can just like look at it. The other piece is that we have fact sheets that show like quick guides to understanding the scoring and how to use your state report card. Okay, scoring. So there's 26 indicators. There's 4 topic areas. I'm going to walk through all of them. Um, just as like a framing thing, we really wanted to use asset-based scoring. Like we're not here to give you an A to F like school. This is not school. The world is much more complicated. And so we chose scoring categories that focus more on progress and opportunities. And so it does sound, I don't, I think it's really important to just think of it this way. So the categories are like lacing up, warming up, making strides, and then building speed. So Missouri right now overall is at the lacing up stage. Most indicators are like a 0 to 5 or a 10 to 15. So I'll point that out as we walk through. Okay. So just to give you just what's happening on this report card, if you click the overall map, this is what will come up. So you have like the core topic area in bold here. Um, Overall grade, the color is like subtopic and indicator below. So I'm gonna go, it does say my internet connection is unstable. So, and I can't tell if you guys are freezing. So just let me know if I'm freezing at all.
We lost you for just a second, but you're back.
Oh no. Okay. Yeah, I think it just said my internet was unstable for a second. I can also turn off, but yeah, just like let me know if I freeze and then I can go back. Basically, this is the report card. Okay, so overall grades, most states are in the middle, and um, that just means that like we all have room to grow. I'm going to walk through each core topic area and talk about the indicators in a little bit more depth. And I know that Jackson, you shared that there were some that might be of more interest to the group, and so we can take a little bit more time on those, um, depending on time. Okay, so the first area is complete streets, active transportation, policy, and planning. So this was my area. Um, Missouri had a total of 6 out of 40 possible points here. So the overview of the area, there's two subtopics, which is complete streets policies and active transportation planning and design. Let's look at the first one first. So I'm assuming you're all familiar with complete streets policies. Missouri has adopted a complete streets legislation, which is great. So that's why you guys got 4 out of 5 points. Um, we look at if each state has adopted a complete streets policy, and there's two kinds typically. We consider um, legislation and then Department of Transportation policies. So we consider the legislation the strongest policies type, and our reasoning here is that passing complete street legislation is more permanent and binding, and that's in contrast to a department policy, which was more likely to get into specific details on course of action, but it could be rescinded or altered when there's a change in department leadership. So basically you get 5 points if you have both policy types and then 4 if you have the legislation. Second, we are looking at the strength of the Complete Streets policies, and we use the National Complete Streets Coalition's updated scoring system to measure the strength. And they have like 10 elements of a strong complete streets policy, and we take that and we basically convert it so that the top score is 20, mostly because states typically
Hey, Natasha, we lost you again for just a second.
my video. How about that?
Yeah, it should help.
Yeah. Yeah. The good news is that you guys have legislation, so that's awesome. And I mean, I think there's obviously room for making it a little stronger, but I think that's like definitely a step in the right direction. Okay, so the next piece is looking at adopting goals for increasing walking and biking, and then a statewide transportation plan. And I know that this is a particular interest, so I'm happy to spend a little more time here. And also, like, if Jackson, if you want to, I don't know, if people have questions about this, we can talk more. But um, we looked at whether states have published goals to increase biking and walking, and we gave basically full points for numerical goals or commitments. And these goals are typically like public commitments, and they provide accountability, and they can often be found within a highway safety plan, a bike ped plan, a sustainability plan, or some other like statewide plan. Then we look at whether the state has adopted a statewide pedestrian or bicycle or active transportation policy. Typically, a lot of states typically combine them into like an active transportation policy or a bike and pedestrian policy. The overarching purpose of these plans is really to just establish a vision. We're establishing a vision for walking and biking as that this is viable in our state, and it's a viable mode for all users and needs. And these plans are ways that states create sort of a foundation that allows state agencies and regional and local partners to coordinate on supporting prioritizing projects and policies and programs. And while like implementation strategies can really vary, active transportation plans help guide decision making for investment. And um, the project prioritization guidance within these plans can often ensure that improvements are more tailored to enhance connectivity and access throughout a network. And I think that it also like sort of sets a precedent for local jurisdictions to develop their own strategies for improving bike and ped plans. And long-range planning for walking and biking is one way to show that there's like this commitment and an opportunity to create these like infrastructure changes or programs. And it can be like a really important step to take in terms of just like setting the course for a state. I know that this is of interest, and I'm also like I think like if it would be of interest, I'd be curious about like who you see as your sort of like peers when it comes to like comparing on a state report card, because I could also I'm happy to like pull examples from other states if you want like as follow up.
So you mentioned Kansas, and
Hmm.
Kansas just had updated their statewide active transportation plan and also has a safe routes to school program, which
Yeah.
Missouri used to have but no longer does. Um, so we border 8 states. There's a lot of opportunity to
Yeah.
look to our neighbors for these kinds of advancements, but Kansas has been, they're half the population, they're a larger land area, but they're making some pretty significant strides here. So I think they might be one of our peers that we'd be interested in continuing to make some connections with and learning more about.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, that's helpful to know because I can I'm happy to share some links and things based on like what you're interested in. Okay, so moving on, we so the next topic area is more about funding. So both federal and state. I'll walk a little bit. I'll sort of break it down. So this first section, we're scoring states for how they're implementing the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program. That's TAP. This section has been relatively unchanged since 2018, but this year we did have to add a new indicator to reward states indicating federal non-TAP funds on walking, biking, and safe routes to school. So basically, like TAP is sort of a one of the largest and like main sources of funding. And basically, if a state chooses like a lot of funding from the federal government can be used for walking and biking. And so we really want to reward when states do that. So I want to note that on the state report cards, these these are basically rewarding or like scoring states on the past year's stewardship of these funds. And some of these indicators actually inform changes that were made to the program as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is kind of cool. So, um, sorry, just to back up, hopefully you're aware of TAP. So But if you aren't, it was created by Congress in 2012 when they merged together three separate programs that support safe routes to school and bicycling and walking. It's the leading source of federal funds. And I think Missouri, I looked this up that in 2022, Missouri got 33 million from transportation alternatives. Um, so it's a significant chunk of money. The federal government makes the funding available to states, but state DOTs get to determine how that funding gets out the door and to sort of like create a competitive process. The three indicators in the yellow box on the screen assess the steps that are really important for turning TAP funding into local sidewalks, crosswalks, and trails. So the first thing is transfers. So 5 points here means that less than 10% of TAP funds were transferred or lapsed. So that's good. Um, Before the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, states were allowed to transfer up to half of TAP money to road and bridge projects rather than retaining it all for biking and walking. So we really want to discourage that because it moved money away from active transportation. So they were docked points based on the amount of funds transferred. A change within the bipartisan infrastructure law was that states are now required to hold a TAP competition and provide technical assistance and basically like affirm that there are not adequate eligible applications before they can move money out of the program. So just basically prove that like there's not that the money isn't needed where it's sort of allocated. Typically, we're looking at data cumulatively over time, but we didn't want to penalize states for transferring when they were permitted to do so. So we created sort of a blank slate, and this is based on more recent performance. Okay, so states also have to hold a competition to award projects, letting governments, schools, nonprofits seek that funding for active transportation. So points in here are about whether a state has held competitions to award TAP projects since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, rather than the over like the history of the program. So this reflects a change from our historic analysis, but you'll see here it's sort of a blank slate. Uh, After the bipartisan infrastructure law, states had about 60% more TAP funding than in prior years. So this allows for a lot more projects, and we really want to aim to better understand, are states able to administer this? And are they able to hold at least one competition? Which you guys were, so that's great. Finally, the last piece is that states also have to obligate the fund. So it's not just enough to award it, you have to help sort of get the project through the contracting and regulations so things can actually get done. So Missouri got a 4 out of 10 here because they've obligated at least 50% of top dollars. So that's good. I think there's room for growth, but it's also like, that's awesome that you guys got at least 50% out the door. So that's good. Okay, so the yellow box is now around three additional ones. So we're looking at how states ensure that funding gets where it's most needed here. So there are three aspects which have to do with just like equity and making sure that we're directing things to where they need to be. Uh, States can make it really a lot easier to get funds where they're needed by adding considerations to how the funds are dispersed. So, for example, they might give extra points to low-income applicants or rural applicants, or they might set aside funding for those types of applications. The bipartisan infrastructure law requires states to both define and prioritize high-need communities in TAP awards, and the definitions can really vary from state to state. Scoring this indicator has been updated to reflect whether the definition and the method of prioritizing communities are clearly communicated to prospective applicants. So we look into the websites, we read all of the background on these grants, and like we try to find it. And we're basically assuming if we cannot find it, that means that prospective applicants can't find it. Um, Basically, the hope is that like clarifying this will inspire high need communities to apply because they can see themselves as potentially successful applicants. Um, New this year is that states can receive a negative points if they don't comply with that. And so, because it's now required by federal law. And so Missouri was given -5 points. And I think I did realize that you guys have made some big improvements by ensuring that all applicants are considered on equal footing, which is incredible. And in this case, the indicator is looking for like basically the next step, which is saying like we're going to prioritize low income, rural, or like whatever is considered need. I think that's defined state by state. Another barrier for low income applicants is that TAP is typically only covering 80% of a project. So low income rural communities often have a really hard time finding money for that 20% match. And so that can keep them from applying in the first place. Um, then finally, we assess what kind of support the state provides to applicants, such as workshops or grant writing assistance. This is really important because it can help get applicants in the door. And what's cool about this is that the bipartisan infrastructure law actually created a new flexibility for states to use up to 5% of their TAP funds to provide that technical assistance. And there's actually a really broad definition of what that support can include, including assistance with applying, project implementation, which can include like environmental review, planning, design, permits, project management. Like this is like a lot of stuff that makes using TAP really hard. And there's actually funding that can be used that already exists to help make that process happen. Yeah, so that's like that what those indicators are about. I'm happy to answer questions about that too. I'll pause at the end of this section just in case there's questions specifically about this. Okay, so the last piece is that like while many other federal funding sources can be used for walking and biking and safe routes to school, TAP is the predominant source of funding for these programs. So this indicator assesses whether a state uses federal funds besides TAP for any of these processes. So safe routes to school, walking, biking. If a state spends money that they could spend on something else, it conveys that they're really committed to that. Missouri doesn't do this, but it is something that's worth thinking about. For example, like another state, New Jersey, for example, or Texas, they use toll credits as a match for TAP. So in Texas, they use it for like small rural communities. And so they receive 5 out of 5. But they use these toll credits, which are basically like federal funding. And like it's not their own state money. And I just want to flag that like Missouri has 8 million in toll credits as of the end of fiscal year 23. So it's something that's like a strategy that could be useful. And it's money that's sort of sitting there and exists already. Okay. Last piece is this is about state funding. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Basically, it just looks at like are states using their own state money to support walking and biking? We basically looked through all of the various ways that states can do that through like taxes and bonds and allocations from the legislature. Looked at ongoing and we look at like whether or not there is funding. The next is the amount per capita. And then the third indicator is like whether they're prioritized for high need communities. Okay, before I move on, are there questions about those first two? Because I know that that was sort of interest, like the federal funding, state funding, complete streets, and the active transportation statewide plan. It's gonna come up video and I'm gonna take a sip of water. Oh, and I'm gonna look at the chat just in case. Okay. Thanks for sharing the report card. Okay, I see. Banning new tolls on public roads. So it's at basically not adding new toll infrastructure, but existing tolls are.
We don't have exist. We had one toll road
Hmm.
to in the Lake of the Ozarks, but that toll was owned by like private individuals and it was paid off, so they closed the toll this last
Okay.
year.
Yeah. I mean, it's still worth no. Okay, so there's not new ones, so maybe it's not a process change, but there is 8 million in toll credits sitting there. So it could be worth looking into as just like a one-time thing if there is. Okay, perfect. Cool. I'm gonna then forge ahead if there's no other questions. All right. Except now I am in a situation where I opened the chat and then okay. Next piece is safe routes to school funding. Looking at ways that we can support safe routes to school, which is a great evidence-based program. And I think as demonstrated by Kansas, it is something that is a really palatable way to talk about walking and biking and safe infrastructure. Basically, like there's a bunch of research behind it, and who can argue with kids and safety? So this first subtopic is really about like how do we get funding to these communities to run great programs? And then the second subtopic is how do we support that work and make sure that like people know about and are able to implement best practices? Um, so the first, I'm gonna go into like these specific indicators. So the first three we have, are they providing specific consideration for safe routes to school projects in TAP funding? So that's like just a lot of times safe routes to school projects won't score as high. They're often also like smaller dollar projects. So kind of like giving like a little bit of more consideration for them or adding points is helpful. Um, the next piece is like, is there a revenue source for safe routes to school other than TAP, which we also examined whether states are funding safe routes to school programming in addition to infrastructure. So research shows that safe routes to school is more effective with programming when it's paired with infrastructure improvements, like block audits, planning grants. Uh, and then finally, we're looking at whether states provide planning or mini grants, which can help get new or low income schools started with safe routes to school. Okay, and then the second subtopic, we're looking at the level of staffing that states put towards safe routes to school. We recommend that states operate some sort of resource center. And then the final indicator is looking at whether states provide technical assistance to support or engage specific groups. And then I'm gonna go to this final indicator section, which is about like neighborhoods and like schools. To be totally transparent, scores are pretty low across the country on this. This is just something that is not as fully developed. Um, but Missouri does have a shared use uh, policy, which is kind of cool. That's impressive. School shared use agreements are basically agreements to open up school playgrounds, fields, or facilities for recreational use by community members outside of school hours. Often this is something that's like really informally done. Like I always did this as a kid. But it provides sort of a formal agreement that like this won't be locked. Like this is a community space and it provides space for physical activity and other community uses outside of school hours. And this can also be something that can help with like park access, like creating green space and community and playgrounds for communities that might otherwise not have access to these important places for physical activity. And while shared use agreements can be made at the local level, a state level policy can really help in two ways, which is overcoming the fears and challenges of shared use and um, there's also opportunities for like moving funding that way. So Missouri got 6 points because it has legislation that recommends but doesn't require that schools provide access to their facilities. The second indicator is whether states provide funding or incentives to support that use of shared use. And then, okay, the last subsection is school siting and design. I'm just going to explain what this is. I realize that there aren't necessarily points here, but basically, it's all about the fact that design affects if people can walk or bike to a location. And so um, the first indicator is actually, can you get negative points here? But good job, Missouri, for not having that. Basically, there's this policy that requires inordinately large school sites, and that was kind of a trend for a while. And it often leads for school sites to be sort of out of town and far away, and it makes it hard to walk or bike to those spaces, and you have to drive. Missouri doesn't have that, so that's awesome. The second indicator is looking at whether states um, have like various design guidelines and siting guidelines um, around schools in their school district. And I think if you're interested in that, we can pull more information about it, but um, it's just ways to make schools more accessible. Okay, so that's all of them. I just want to share that like all of this information is in the report. There's also a bunch of fact sheets about like what you can do for all of these indicators. Like how could we improve, I don't know, like each little indicator. And I'm happy to talk through that if there's particular things that I said that are of interest. But we have a bunch of these, so I'm happy to share. And then you're also welcome to email me if you have a particular question, like, oh, like, why did this state score well? I have all of that stuff in a spreadsheet. And I also